So let's talk about metabolic health. And you're the perfect guy for this, Metabolic Mike. Let's give the overview of what that is, and then we'll give people that map how to work their way back.
Jesse, it's a great question, a great point that we need to really drive home. The way to think about metabolism and metabolic health, I like to create parallels with finances. If you have $25,000 in credit card debt, and then you're going to go on a trip to Fiji with your buddies and throw it on a new credit card, you're going to have a lot of financial debt, not really making good decisions when it comes to finance. And unfortunately, our metabolism is sort of like the currency of our body. Our cells need this form of energy known as ATP. And ultimately, the reason why we eat, the reason why we breathe is to make this cellular energy. And so we want that process to be more efficient and flexible. In certain situations, we might need glucose if we're going to go sprint, or our kid is running into the street and there's a bus coming. We need that glucose. That's that quick fuel. Very efficient for explosive movements, for high stress situations. But when you and I are having a conversation like this, our brain is, our neurons and our prefrontal cortex is helping us think and listen and absorb this information, most likely burning fats for fuel, because we're not in a high intensity exercise type situation. Well, as we gain more body fat, as we become more sedentary and we don't move as much, our body is not able to flexibly go back and forth between fats and carbohydrates for fuel. We get sort of stuck, pigeonholed in burning glucose for fuel. And that process in and of itself becomes even more compromised as we get more and more insulin resistant. And so, again, this is the currency of our body, just like finances are the currency of our life, right? We need money to travel and go on vacation. Well, it turns out that a lot of people have metabolic debt, just like a lot of people have credit card debt. And the way that we can sort of unravel this to help our body become more metabolically flexible and metabolically healthy are just the steps that we've been talking about. And I like to emphasize exercise. And exercise, I think, and just actually walking. There's really good evidence to show that just walking 9,000 steps per day can do wonders for our ability to burn fat for fuel, to burn body fat, to help support our blood sugar regulation, which is really important. We hear from our healthcare practitioners about the harms of high LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, and how that causes, in an oversimplified model, our arteries to become clogged like a pipe, in our kitchen, for example, if you pour baking grease down the pipe. Well, cardiovascular disease development and atherosclerosis is much more complicated than that. In fact, having a high glycemic index meal in a post-meal window causes constriction of your coronary arteries to a much greater degree independently of your blood cholesterol. So the best thing you can do for your cardiovascular system health is actually to have better blood sugar regulation. And going back to exercise, one of the best ways to lower your blood sugar, even if you do have a moderately high carbohydrate diet, is to exercise. People have worn continuous glucose monitors forever. I remember the first time I was wearing one getting into this in 2017. I was curious, and I've been keto for about 3 years. I went to a vegan restaurant. And I said, we've never been here before. This was a very popular restaurant in Seattle. And I said, look, and I filmed the whole thing. I had my glucose was hovering at like 80 milligrams per deciliter in the healthy range. Had the meal, we had pizza, they had bread, they recommend this, vegan pasta. My glucose went from 80 milligrams per deciliter to up to 180 milligrams per deciliter. And I know it's just a one-off evening, but I was concerned about my health. Like, I can't go to bed with a glucose like triple what it normally is. So I took my dogs for a brisk 15-minute walk. My glucose dropped back down to 85 milligrams per deciliter. And I didn't eat anything, didn't take any supplements, just went for a walk. So when you move your muscles, your muscles are actually a glucose sponge. About 60 to 100% of post-meal glucose is deposited in your skeletal muscle. I think a lot of people don't recognize that. And this is why we talk a lot about protein and strength training, because as you get older, you naturally catabolize your skeletal muscle. You start to lose muscular strength. You start to lose muscular size. The fibers change in your muscle tissue. This is why resistance training and exercise are so important throughout your lifespan. From the metabolic health standpoint, the more muscle you have and the healthier it is, the more what we want to avoid when it comes to metabolic health is the peaks and troughs and the so-called variability in our blood glucose levels. So we want more constant, more stable blood glucose. We want to avoid the massive swings. The massive swings are where we run into problems from an inflammatory standpoint, an oxidative stress standpoint, and also chronic inflammatory standpoint. So that's really important that we minimize the variability. And so how do we do that? Well, I think it makes sense that most people consume a low or moderate carbohydrate diet. Definitely not have any sugar sweetened beverages, store-bought baked goods. I mean, this is maybe a weekend treat once a week, things like that, maybe a cheat day, if you will. We want to minimize those processed foods, sugar sweetened beverages, and baked goods. And also every day, try to walk at least 9,000 steps per day. I like to tell people about this researcher at UT Austin. His name is Edward Coyle. And him and his colleagues have run a number of different experiments on study subjects that I think are worth talking about. A lot of people are like, yeah, I don't walk that much, but I go to the gym. I do a spin class, or I go to Orange Theory or F45. All that is great. It's movement. It's fantastic. But if you don't at least walk 6,000 to 9,000 steps per day, you're actually not burning as much fat during those classes compared to people who do. And I think that's kind of eye-opening for a lot of people and really important. And so they've done some experiments where they relegate people either to 2,000 steps per day, which the average American walks around 3,000 steps per day. And so they wanted to simulate this in a lab, and they had 3 different arms here, the 2,000 steps per day, the 4,000 and 8,000 steps per day. They relegated people to just walk those steps for 3 days. Then they had them do a 60-minute zone 2 workout, where really we should be burning a lot of fat for fuel. Like we went back and talked about burning fats versus burning carbs, at rest. But it turns out that the people that only walked 2,000 steps per day did not burn appreciable amounts of body fat during the 60-minute structured exercise session. So again, just think about this. You're spending this time with meal prep. You're trying to lose weight, trying to get into that, smaller pant size or improve your metabolic health. And you're just going to the gym, but you're pretty sedentary for most of the day. That workout is not going to be as efficient if you don't also walk throughout the day and have a few exercise snacks. And this is very simple. Just think, if you eat 2 or 3 meals a day, you want to take a 15 to 20 minute walk after you eat. And you can get your family involved. You can take your work calls. Instead of sitting on the Zoom meeting of your work call, go outside or get a stay-at-home desk or a treadmill and start to move during those work calls. And these exercise snacks are actually quite efficient at not only burning fat and keeping your blood sugar low, and that ties into metabolic health, which is really important. I mean, people have heard the statistics here in the US, about 93% of adults have some degree of metabolic dysfunction. And that is related not only to their blood sugar health, but also their visceral adipose tissue, their lipid levels, and beyond. And we can talk about blood tests later and triglycerides and why that's important. But this is a very simple fix, Jesse. I think everyone should have a pedometer of some kind, whether it's a Garmin watch, an Apple Watch, a Fitbit. We should be enumerating and tracking our steps. I mean, this is just basic 101. And, if you're not getting the 8,000 to 9,000 steps per day, not only will that make fat gain more likely, not only will that make, blood sugar dysregulation more likely, but there's a meta-analysis by Bannock et al. Where they looked at, I think it was like 17 different studies that have been long-term cohort studies where they're tracking people over time and looking at their health complications over a long period of time. And using the pedometer data, they found that when people don't walk at least 9,000 steps per day, their risk of developing a lot of common conditions, from sleep apnea to gastrointestinal reflux disorder, joint pain, depression, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, all the conditions that most people go to primary care doctors to get some sort of resolution with, their risk is significantly higher compared to if they just walk 9,000 steps per day. And breaking that up into small chunks makes it achievable, attainable. Oftentimes you feel better. Oftentimes that work meeting or that Zoom call, that's the obligatory thing you have to do for the boss. It's much more enjoyable if you're just out going for a walk. And then you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. We talked about the importance of daylight. You're walking and getting your sun exposure, which might help with vitamin D synthesis. It might help with circadian rhythm health and sleep later in the day. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with over the years that say, particularly postmenopausal women, sleep is really a challenge during menopause, as you likely know. People say, well, I've tried this sleep drug. I've tried Ambien. I've tried L-theanine. I've tried GABA. Like nothing can help me sleep. I mean, this is a common thing that we hear. And oftentimes I recommend oral progesterone. As you know, when you go through menopause, hormone shifts and so forth, and progesterone tends to decline. And oral progesterone is converted to allopregnanolone, which helps with sleep, but also just getting out during the day and walking. Many of these people don't see the light of day. They get up, they go on the bus or the train, or they're in their car, go to the office, come home. They might go to a spin class or go to the gym, and then they have dinner, and then they watch TV and go to bed. And that's just not enough sunlight to create the sleep pressure for our body's ability to have a good, restful sleep. And I think that's just something that a piece of low-hanging fruit that can really help a lot of people. So trying to, even if you work in a corporate building, I know a lot of people in tech, whether it's Amazon, Facebook Marketplace, Google, all that, are now going back to the office. I was sat next on an airplane just last week with a lady who was saying that everyone in Amazon is freaking out. They're going back to 5 days a week. It was like 1 day a week, then 3 days a week. And so she thinks that all the tech companies and many other companies are going to go back to 5 days a week. And so just structure, put on your phone, like 10:30, 12:30, 3 o'clock, go for a 10-minute walk. I'm sure your supervisor, project manager would allow you to do that. There's a lot of health benefits. You'll be more focused during your afternoon work sessions, and it will help create that sleep pressure. And you'll probably burn more fat at your structured exercise session when you do that, either before work or after work.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
The thing that's going against us, especially if we're living life blind and drinking soda and having just sandwiches and French fries and not moving, is as our metabolism falls into the so-called insulin resistant or metabolically dysfunctional category, we naturally become more catabolic. Our muscle becomes compromised. And part of that is because